Hello, this is going to be over Chapter 17, the endocrine system, Objective 7. Objective 7. Objective 7 is going to be talking about the three types of stimuli that cause hormones to be released from their glands. So we've always said, hormones get released from endocrine glands, but we never really have said how. So what methods do the hormones actually know it's time to be released? There's three. Now, remembering back to uh, AMP1, where we talked about negative feedback. So, negative feedback is the synthesis and release of most hormones are regulated by. So, negative feedback is the main mechanism by which hormones are released. So, a stimulus is going to trigger that hormone secretion. Those hormone levels are going to rise, causing effects in the target tissue. And then that is then going to send a signal back and say, quit releasing hormones, we're good. So, again, there are three types of stimuli that result in the endocrine gland making and releasing those hormones. They are what's called humoral stimuli, hormonal stimuli, and neural stimuli. So, with humoral stimuli, humor, that first part of that word means moisture or bodily fluids. So, that kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about here. Endocrine glands that secrete their hormones based on changing blood levels of certain ions or nutrients. So, really, it's what is in the blood, what ions or nutrients are in the blood, how much is there, and that's going to affect certain glands to secrete hormones. So, for example, when we're talking about ions, we're talking about calcium levels in the blood. And we've already talked about that way back in the skeletal system. Remember, we were talking about calcitonin and parathyroid hormone and how if blood levels have low levels of calcium, parathyroid hormone is going to be secreted. If blood levels have um, high calcium levels in the blood, then calcitonin is going to be secreted. So again, that was an example of ions and their concentrations in the blood affecting hormone secretions. Now, nutrients is another thing that's found in the blood that can also affect hormone secretions. Examples would be glucose. So again, if you've got high blood glucose levels, you've just eaten a meal, you got a lot of glucose in the blood, that's going to trigger the secretion of insulin. If your blood glucose levels are low, that's going to trigger the secretion of glucagon. So again, ions and nutrients in the blood um, have an effect on endocrine gland secretion. And when that is affecting endocrine glands, it's called humoral stimuli. Now, hormonal stimuli is referring to endocrine glands that release their hormones in response to hormones. So it's kind of that this is going to cause this to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. So we have just a general example here. We've got your hypothalamus, which is going to secrete thyrotropin releasing hormone. Now, thyrotropin releasing hormone will then cause the pituitary gland, see the little plus sign, to secrete thyroid stimulating hormone. That thyroid stimulating hormone is then going to cause the thyroid gland to secrete T4 and T3. So TRH causes the secretion of TSH, which causes the secretion of T4. And like we said, negative feedback is involved. So when T4 and T3 are present in the blood, it has a inhibitory effect back on the hypothalamus, so it prevents more secretion, negative feedback. So it's when a hormone causes the stimulus of another hormone, basically. You have this paper in lab, if you're in my lab class, and if you're also in the lecture, it should be in the packet there. So this is just an awesome example of hormonal stimuli. We have here the hypothalamus, and as you know, the hypothalamus secretes many, many hormones, and you can see them all listed right here. I've just given you the abbreviation. So we've got gonadotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, prolactin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone. What sounds familiar with all of those names? They all have the word releasing in them. Okay. And then you also have antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Remember, those are created in the hypothalamus, but they are sent to the posterior pituitary for release. So these hormones right here, you also have prolactin inhibiting hormone and growth hormone inhibiting hormone as well, coming from the hypothalamus. So these are then going to target the pituitary gland. These first five up here that are listed are going to target the anterior lobe. The last two over here are going to target the posterior lobe. So those that target the anterior lobe are going, remember your hormones that come from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland: follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, adrenocorticotropin hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, prolactin, and growth hormone. So when gonadotropin releasing hormone comes from the hypothalamus and targets the anterior lobe of the pituitary, it will then cause the release of follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone to be secreted, which will then target the gonads, ovaries, and testes. Corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, when it shows up to the anterior lobe, it will then cause the secretion of ACTH, adrenocorticotropin hormone, which will then target the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. So these are all examples of hormonal stimuli, one hormone causing the release of another hormone down the line. These are what I would call hormone pathways. So when you're looking at, for example, if one of the hormones on your test that you specifically have to know is ACTH, you need to know this whole pathway for that particular hormone. Neural stimuli is the other one. This is the one you're probably most familiar with because we just got done talking about this in AMP1. So nerve fibers stimulate hormone release. So for example, the sympathetic nervous system, when you're in fight or flight mode, is going to target many things, such as increased breathing rate, increased heart rate, increased sugar in the blood. It's also going to target the adrenal medulla gland. Now, that's the inside of the adrenal gland. The adrenal medulla secretes epinephrine, norepinephrine. So that sympathetic neuron is going to come down and tell that adrenal medulla to secrete norepinephrine and epinephrine. Now, when these two get into the bloodstream, they are called hormones. If they're secreted from the end of a neuron, it's called a neurotransmitter. It's the same hormone. I mean, it's the same chemical. It's just where it's secreted from. If it comes from a neuron, it's called a neurotransmitter. If it comes from an endocrine gland, it's called a hormone. So these hormones are fixing to go out into the bloodstream and go body wide and let the entire body know you're in fight or flight mode. So that's a neuron, sympathetic neuron, stimulating a gland. And then you've got the picture here. So you've got your central nervous system again, sympathetic nervous system. Remember, that was one of the subcategories there of your autonomic nervous system. It is then going to go out, target that adrenal medulla, cause the secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine, which will then travel through the capillary to the target cells. Now, the nervous system can modify both turning on and turning off factors that affect the endocrine system. Again, there are three types of factors that stimulate. They're going to be humoral, hormonal, and neural. And then you've got factors that inhibit, which is going to be negative feedback. We mentioned that previously, how when you have an excess presence of hormone in the bloodstream, such as thyroid hormones, they can then go back and tell the hypothalamus, hey, quit causing the release of thyrotropin releasing hormone. We don't need any more. So those inhibitory factors would be your negative feedback. Nervous system can actually override the endocrine system. So we talk about how the nervous system and the endocrine system are both control systems, but when it comes right down to it, the nervous system still has the most control. It can override the endocrine system. For example, when your body is under severe stress, such as fight or flight response, blood glucose levels will rise above normal to make sure that you have sufficient fuel. Keep in mind that sugar in your blood is fuel for those cells to generate ATP. Your mitochondria need that sugar so they can convert it through cellular respiration to ATP. No sugar, no ATP. So normally, we don't like a lot of sugar in the blood, but in fight or flight mode, we do. We need that sugar in the blood. So in this instance, the nervous system can override and tell the pancreas, quit secreting insulin. We want sugar in the blood right now. Because, when blood sugar spikes, insulin's secreted. Well, that's we don't want insulin to be getting rid of all the sugar in the blood. We want it in the blood during the fight or flight response. And that concludes objective 7.